Vatican Media English Channel, 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 Vatican Media English
Christus surrexit, Alleluia. Christ is risen, Alleluia. And welcome to Vatican Radio's live streamed broadcast of Pope Leo XIV's audience with officials of the Roman Curia and employees of the Holy See, the Governorate of Vatican City State, and the Vicariate of Rome. We're coming to you live from the Paul VI Hall, right beside St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City State. And for those of you watching on video, you can see the employees of the Vatican, the various groups here today who have gathered for this special meeting with the Holy Father. The popes routinely visit with Vatican employees, especially around Christmas time, as well as members of the Roman Curia. With the election of our new Holy Father, Pope Leo XIV, he has taken the opportunity to hold an audience for all of those women and men who work more or less directly with the Pope in the day-to-day operation of the Vatican, the Holy See, the various dicasterial offices, the various dicasterial offices of the Roman Curia, as well as employees of the Vicariate or Diocese of Rome, the Pope's diocese. Of course, the Pope is the Bishop of Rome. And so we have several thousand people here today. The operation of the center of the Catholic Church, many people are surprised to know, is actually involves only a few thousand people, despite the fact that the Church of Rome and the Roman Curia, the Holy See, are the highest levels of the Catholic Church. My name is Christopher Wells from the Vatican Media section of the Dicastery for Communication. I'll be providing the English language translation of the Pope's remarks this morning. And as we go to here, I would like to welcome all of you joining us through the various Vatican Media channels, our Vatican Audio or Radio app, the Vatican News website, or our Vatican News English section YouTube channel. Welcome to all of those joining us via our partner stations, including EWTN TV, Catholic Faith Network in America, Shalom World Television Networks USA, Catholic TV, and Catholic Radio in India. Very warm welcome, one and all. The various administrative departments of the Curia, the Holy See, the Vatican City State, and the Diocese of Rome, as many of you might know, have been the subject of various reforms and restructuring programs over the past few years, especially under the pontificate of the late Holy Father Francis. Just a few words about these various organizations. The Roman Curia, according to Predicati Evangelium, the preaching of the gospel, which is the Holy Father's, Pope Francis' document on the reform of the Roman Curia and on its service to the Church in the world, explains that the Roman Curia is at the service of the Pope, who, as the successor of Peter, is the perpetual and visible source and foundation of the unity both of the bishops and of the whole company of the faithful. That's a citation from Lumen Gentium, as well as Pastor Aeternus, the dogmatic constitution of the First Vatican Council. And Predicate Evangelium continues, by virtue of this bond, the work of the Roman Curia is also organically related to the College of Bishops and individual bishops, as well as to episcopal conferences and their regional and continental groupings, and the hierarchical structures of the Eastern churches. All of these, it says, are of great pastoral benefit as expressions of the affective and effective communion existing among the bishops. And Predicate Evangelium explains the Roman Curia is not set between the Pope and the bishops, but is at the service of both, according to the modalities proper to the nature of each. And so the various dicasteries, which function kind of analogously, somewhat after the manner of cabinet ministries in secular government. Of course, it's a very analogous comparison. But they cover different areas of church life, including evangelization, the doctrine of the faith, the service of charity, the Eastern churches, as we mentioned, the liturgy, beatifications and canonizations, bishops, clergy, religious life, the laity, the family life, Christian unity and interreligious dialogue, as well as foreign relations with the Secretariat of State, the interpretation of canon law, communication, as we mentioned, the various courts of the Holy See and of the Vatican, as well as financial matters coordinated through the Secretariat for the Economy and the Council for the Economy, as well as others. They also have charge of the various events, including this audience, undertaken by the Holy Father. And there are a number of other institutions connected with the Holy See as well, all of those under the title of the Roman Curia. So members of those various dicasteries and employees of those dicasteries, as well as those other institutions and ecclesial bodies, are all present here, represented. We also have employees of the Governorate of Vatican City State. The Governorate is responsible for the administration of the sovereign Vatican City State, which as its website says, the Governorate exercises its power and functions attributed to ensure the absolute and visible independence of the Holy See, including in the international arena, in fulfilling the universal and pastoral mission of the Supreme Pontiff. After many centuries of independence, the so-called Papal States went through a period of tension with, at the time, the newly unified country of Italy. And for the space of several decades, there was a great deal of conflict, at least diplomatic conflict, between the Pope and the independent Italian state. It was resolved with the Lateran Accords from the 1920s that established Vatican City State as a sovereign and independent state, the smallest sovereign state in the world. And so the Vatican City State has to have an administration that encompasses everything from international relations, which are dealt with by the entity of the Holy See, which acts primarily through the Secretariat of State. But Vatican City State also has all of those things that pertain to independence, including things like a small military, the Swiss Guards, the police force, the Vatican Gendarmerie. They have a post office, a fire department, a pharmacy, a healthcare system, even a supermarket and a department store, bank, very famously, and all of those institutions are, as the Vatican City State website describes, there to ensure the absolute and visible independence of the Holy See, even in the international sphere. The governorate is composed of the government bodies and other entities that cooperate in exercising the executive power of Vatican City State. And in the areas mentioned in various parts of the Lateran Treaty in accordance with their specific legal status. The governorate also carries out any other activities required in serving the Holy See, so representatives of Vatican City State are here present in the Paul VI Hall this morning. And finally, we also see members of the Vicariate or Diocese of Rome. The administration of the Diocese of Rome was also recently, within the last couple of years, reorganized by Pope Francis through an apostolic constitution in Ecclesiarum Communione, in the communion of the churches. The title is taken, as usual, from the first words of that document. And the apostolic constitution explains that in the communion of the churches, the Church of Rome is entrusted with the particular responsibility of receiving the faith and charity of Christ transmitted by the apostles and witnessing to them in an exemplary manner. And it goes on to say that it is therefore the primary concern of her bishop, the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, to provide whatever is necessary for this church to correspond to what the Spirit of the Lord Jesus Christ tells her. In Ecclesiarum Communione also recalls that joined with the other bishops in the common apostolic succession, the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, who is the successor of Peter, and as such the perpetual and visible principle and foundation of the unity both of the bishops and of the multitude of the faithful. He exercises his ministry first of all by ensuring that the people of God in the diocese entrusted to him is confirmed in faith and charity. In this way, he first of all honors the principle according to which each bishop, by governing well a portion of the universal church, contributes effectively to the good of the whole mystical body, which is also the body of the churches. The Apostolic Constitution notes that the church is placed in the world as a Samaritan, citing the very famous parable from Luke, as well as a sacrament of salvation, in intimate solidarity with the history of the women and men who live in this world, awaiting its fulfillment in Christ. It goes on, as we recall the 60 years since the beginning of the Second Vatican Ecumenical Council, we feel with particular urgency the call to missionary conversion of the whole Church, accompanied by a more lively awareness of its constitutively synodal dimension. Of course, synodality was one of the hallmarks of Pope Francis's magisterium, the subject of the Synod of Bishops' most recent General Assemblies, and Pope Leo as well has highlighted the need to continue to focus on the Church's characteristic of synodality. For the Diocese of Rome, in order to revive the mission and the primacy of charity and the proclamation of divine mercy, episcopal collegiality and the active participation of the faithful, of the baptized people, must be supported and promoted in synergy, says in Ecclesiarum Communione. And that is the context in which that document highlights the commitment to the reorganization of the vicariate, which in Rome performs the functions of a diocesan curia. Pope Francis' work continues the efforts of Paul VI and St. John Paul II. For those of you listening in on the radio, you can hear the warm welcome extended to Pope Leo as he enters the Paul VI Hall and approaches his place on the main stage, as it were. A very warm welcome. I think I can speak for all of the employees here who have been very enthusiastically welcoming our new Pope, Pope Leo XIV, and we'll hear his voice in just a moment here. Pope Leo is smiling very warmly at the employees who are gathered here today.
Grazie.
Thank you very much, he says. Pope Leo himself was a member of the Curia for just a couple of years, after spending a long time in Peru as the Bishop of the Missionary Diocese of Chicago. And so has a great deal of familiarity with the people who work here at
Quando
the Vatican.
gli applausi durano più del discorso, dovrò fare un discorso più lungo, allora state attenti.
The Pope tells a bit of a joke. He says the longer the applause, the longer.
Nel nome del Padre, del Figlio e dello Spirito Santo, la pace sia con voi.
And begins as always with the sign of the cross and the liturgical greeting, peace be with you. And will now give his address to Vatican
Cari fratelli e
employees.
sorelle,
Dear brothers and sisters,
sono contento di poter salutare tutti voi
I'm happy to be
che
able to greet
formate
all
le
of you
comunità di
who
lavoro
form the
della
working
Curia
communities
Romana, del
of the Roman
Governaturato
Curia, the
e del
Governorate,
Vicariato di
and the
Roma.
Vicariate of Rome.
Saluto i capi dei dicasteri, gli
I
altri
greet the
superiori,
heads of
i
dicasters
capi
and other
ufficio,
superiors, the heads
tutti gli
of
ufficiali,
offices, and all the
come pure
officials,
le autorità della
as
città
well as
del
the Vatican City
Vaticano,
authorities,
i dirigenti
managers,
e i
and
dipendenti.
employees.
E mi fa molto piacere che siano presenti anche parecchi
And
familiari,
I'm very pleased that
approfittando
several
del
family
giorno di
members,
sabato.
the various family members are also
Questo
present,
nostro
taking
primo
advantage of the
incontro
fact that this takes
non è
place,
certo
this
il
audience is
momento
taking
per
place
fare
on
discorsi
Saturday.
programmatici, ma
Our
piuttosto è
first
per
meeting is
me
certainly not the time to make
l'occasione di
programmatic speeches,
dirvi
but rather an
grazie
opportunity
per il servizio
for
che
me to say
svolgete.
thank you for the service you perform.
Questo servizio che io, per così dire,
This service,
eredito dai
which
miei
I, so to speak, have
predecessori.
inherited from my
Grazie
predecessors,
davvero.
I thank you very, very much.
Sì, come sapete,
Yes, as you know,
io sono arrivato solo 2 anni fa,
I arrived
quando
only 2 years
l'amato
ago.
Papa Francesco mi ha
And the
nominato
beloved Pope
prefetto
Francis
del Dicastero per i
named me as
Vescovi.
prefect of the dicastery for the
Allora ho
bishops.
lasciato la diocesi di
At that
Chiclayo in
point, I
Perù
left the diocese
e
of
sono
Chiclayo in
venuto a
Peru and
lavorare
came to work
qui.
here.
Che cambiamento!
What a
E
change.
adesso poi cosa posso dire?
And now then, what can I
Solo
say?
quello che Simon Pietro
Only
disse
what
a
Simon
Gesù
Peter said to
sul lago di
Jesus on
Tiberiade.
Lake Tiberias.
Signore,
Lord,
tu sai tutto.
you know
Tu
everything.
sai che ti voglio bene.
You know that I love you.
I papi passano, la curia rimane.
The popes come and go, the curia remains. It's a bit of a chuckle and a round of applause.
Questo vale in ogni
This is
chiesa
true in every
particolare
particular
per le
church
curie vescovili
for the
e vale anche per la
Episcopal
curia
curia.
del vescovo di
It also
Roma.
applies to the curia of the
La
Bishop of
curia
Rome.
è l'istituzione
The
che
curia is the
custodisce e
institution
trasmette
that
la
preserves
memoria
and transmits
storica
the
di una
historical
chiesa,
memory of a church,
del ministero dei suoi
of the ministry
vescovi.
of its bishops.
Questo è molto importante.
This is very
La
important.
memoria è un elemento
Memory is an
essenziale
essential
in un
element
organismo
in a living
vivente.
organism.
Non è solo rivolta al
It's not only
passato,
directed to the past,
ma nutre il
it
presente
nourishes
e
the present
orienta al
and
futuro.
orients the future.
Senza memoria il cammino si smarisce,
Without
perde il
memory,
senso del
it loses
percorso.
its way. It loses its sense of
Ecco,
direction.
carissimi, questo è il
And
primo
so,
pensiero che
dear
vorrei
friends,
condividere con
This
voi.
is the first thought I'd like to share with you.
Lavorare nella curia romana
Working in the
significa
Roman Curia
contribuire a tenere
means
viva la
contributing,
memoria
keeping the
della
memory
sede
of the
apostolica,
apostolic see
nel senso
alive.
vitale che ho appena
In the
accennato,
vital sense I just
così
explained,
che il ministero del Papa
so
possa
that the ministry of the
attuarsi
Pope
nel migliore dei
can be
modi.
carried out in the best
Per
possible way.
analogia, questo si può
By
dire
analogy,
anche
this
dei
can also be said
servizi dello
of the
Stato della
services
città
of
del
the Vatican
Vaticano.
City State.
C'è poi un altro aspetto che desidero richiamare,
Then there's another
complementare a
aspect I'd
quello
like to
della
recall,
memoria,
which is complementary to the idea
la
of memory,
dimensione
namely
missionaria della
the
Chiesa,
missionary dimension of the
della
church,
curia e di ogni istituzione
of the
legata
curia
al
and of
ministero
every
petrino.
institution linked to the Petrine
Su
ministry.
questo ha insistito molto Papa Francesco,
Pope
che
Francis
coerentemente con il progetto
insisted on this
enunciato
great deal,
nell'esortazione apostolica
consistently with
Evangelii
the project set
Gaudium,
out in the
ha
apostolic
riformato la curia romana nella
Evangelii
prospettiva
Gaudium.
dell'evangelizzazione,
Pope
con la
Francis reformed the
Costituzione
Roman Curia from the
apostolica
perspective
predicate Evangelium.
evangelization, from the
Questo l'ha
perspective of
fatto
evangelization
ponendosi
with the
nella scia
apostolic
dei
constitution,
predecessori,
predicate
specialmente di
Evangelium,
San Paolo
following in the
VI e di
footsteps of
San
his
Giovanni Paolo
predecessors,
II.
especially St. Paul VI and St.
Come
John
penso
Paul II.
sappiate, l'esperienza della missione fa parte
As I think
della
you are
mia
aware,
vita,
the mission
non
experience
solo
is
in
part of
quanto
my own life,
battezzato come per
not only
tutti
as a
noi
baptized
cristiani,
person, as it is for all
ma
of us
perché come
Christians,
religioso agostiniano
but
sono
because as an
stato
Augustinian
missionario in
religious,
Perù.
I was a missionary
In
in
mezzo al
Peru.
popolo
And in
peruviano
the midst of
è
the
maturata
Peruvian
la mia
people,
vocazione
my pastoral
pastorale.
vocation matured.
Non potrà mai ringraziare abbastanza il
I
Signore
can
per
never
questo
thank the Lord
dono.
enough for this gift.
Poi la chiamata a servire la Chiesa qui nella curia romana
Then the call to
è
serve the church
stata
here in the
una
Roman
nuova
Curia was a new
missione
mission,
che ho condiviso con voi
which I've
in
shared with
questi
you
ultimi 2
for
anni
these past 2 years.
e ancora la continuo e la continuerò
And I still continue
finché
that
Dio
mission and
vorrà
will continue it as
in
long as
questo
God wills
servizio che mi è stato affidato.
in the service that has been entrusted
Perciò
to me.
ripeto a voi
Therefore,
quello che ho detto nel
I repeat
mio
you what
primo
I said
saluto
in
la
my first
sera
greeting
dell'8 maggio.
on the evening of May 8th.
Dobbiamo cercare insieme
Together we
come
must look for
essere
ways
una
to be a
chiesa
missionary church,
missionaria, una chiesa che
a
costruisce
church
i
that builds
ponti,
bridges
il dialogo,
and
sempre
encourages dialogue,
aperta ad accogliere, con le braccia aperte a tutti,
a church ever
tutti
open
coloro
to
che hanno
welcoming with
bisogno
open
della
arms
nostra carità,
all those who are in need of our
della
charity,
nostra
our
presenza,
presence,
del dialogo e dell'amore. Queste parole erano
dialogue, and
indirizzate
love.
alla Chiesa di Roma e
And we
ora le
seek
ripeto
together-
pensando alla missione di questa Chiesa verso tutte le chiese e il mondo intero,
These words were addressed to the
servire
Church of
la
Rome,
comunione,
and now we repeat them, considering the
l'unità,
mission of this church
nella
towards
carità
all the churches and the
nella
whole
verità.
world, to serve communion,
Il
unity.
Signore ha dato a Pietro
in charity
e
and
ai
in
suoi
truth.
successori
The
questo
Lord gave
compito.
Peter and his
A tutti voi in
successors
modi
this task.
diversi
All of
collaborate
you,
per
in different
questa
ways,
grande opera.
collaborate in this great work.
Ciascuno dà il suo contributo,
Each one makes his
svolgendo il proprio
contribution
lavoro
by carrying
quotidiano
out his own
con
daily work with
impegno
commitment,
e
but
anche
also
con
with faith.
fede,
Because
perché la
faith
fede e la preghiera
and
sono
prayer
come il sale per i cibi,
are like salt for
danno
food.
sapore.
They give it flavor.
Se dunque dobbiamo tutti cooperare alla
If,
grande
therefore,
causa
we must
dell'unità
all
e
cooperate
dell'amore,
in this great cause of
cerchiamo
unity
di
and of
farlo
love.
prima di tutto
Let us try
con
to
il
do
nostro
so, first of all, by
comportamento
our
nelle
behavior
situazioni di
in
ogni
everyday
giorno,
situations,
a partire anche
beginning
dall'ambiente
in the workplace.
lavorativo. Ognuno può essere costruttore di unità
Everyone can be a builder
con
of
gli
unity
atteggiamenti verso i
with
colleghi,
their attitudes towards their colleagues,
superando le inevitabili
overcoming
incomprensioni
inevitable
con
misunderstandings
pazienza,
with patience
con
and
umiltà,
humility,
mettendosi nei panni degli altri,
putting themselves in the shoes of
evitando i
others,
pregiudizi
avoiding
e
prejudices,
anche con una buona dose di
and also
umorismo, come
with
ci
a
ha
good sense
insegnato
of humor,
Papa
as
Francesco.
Pope Francis has taught us.
Cari fratelli e sorelle,
Dear brothers and sisters,
cari fratelli e sorelle, vi
brothers
ringrazio
and
ancora di
sisters,
cuore.
I thank you once
Siamo
again
nel
from the
mese di
bottom of my
maggio,
heart.
invochiamo
We're in the month of
insieme la Vergine
Let's
Maria
invoke together
perché
the Virgin
benedica
Mary,
la curia romana
that she may
e la
bless
città
the
del
Roman
Vaticano
Curia
e
and
anche le
Vatican
vostre
City,
famiglie,
and also your
specialmente
families,
i bambini,
especially
gli
the
anziani
children, the
e le
elderly,
persone malate e sofferenti.
and the sick and suffering.
Grazie.
Thank you. And
Allora diciamo insieme, Ave Maria, piena di grazia, il Signore è con te. Tu sei benedetta fra le donne e benedetto è il frutto del tuo seno Gesù. Santa Maria, Madre di Dio, prega per noi peccatori, adesso e nell'ora della nostra morte. Amen. Dominus vobiscum.
the apostolic blessing.
Sit nomen Domini benedictum. Adiutorium nostrum in nomine Domini. Benedicat vos omnipotens Deus, Pater et Filius et Spiritus Sanctus. Amen. Grazie di nuovo, tanti auguri.
Thank you again, and best wishes for everybody. So the Holy Father concludes his address to Vatican employees, including members of the Curia and Vatican City State and the Diocese or Vicariate of Rome, by leading them in the recitation of the Hail Mary for the month of May, encouraging them to pray together to the Blessed Virgin Mary, and afterwards extends his apostolic blessing again to all those present, to all of the officials and employees of the Curia of Vatican City State and of the Vicariate, and especially to their families, their children, the elderly, and those who are sick and suffering. And as usual, the audience concludes with the Holy Father having the opportunity to meet various people who are present for the audience. Those are, first of all, the various heads of dicasteries and other curial officials, bishops as well. And it is pretty routine for papal audiences to conclude with what's called the bacio mano, the kissing of the hand, it basically means in Italian the opportunity for various people to greet the Holy Father. As we mentioned at the beginning of the broadcast, this is the new Pope's first opportunity to greet in a formal setting all of those people who are most closely linked with the work of the Pope and of the Bishop of Rome. And so this morning's audience was for the various officials of the Roman Curia and the employees of the Roman Curia, as well as employees of Vatican City State, of the Holy See, and of the Vicariate of Rome. As the Holy Father mentioned in his address, he himself was a member of the Roman Curia for the past couple of years, almost 2 years, as head of the dicastery for bishops. The prefects, of course, who are roughly equivalent to cabinet ministers in secular governments, have various charges. At the time, Pope Leo XIV was Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost, and his competence was anything that had to do with the bishops of the Catholic Church. But he mentioned that he was a member of this relatively small community now for the past couple of years, and had gotten to know already some of the various people in the Vatican and Holy See and Diocese of Rome administration. And they had gotten to know him a little bit too, as is pretty common with the heads of dicasteries and various cardinals here. And so now he has his first opportunity as Leo XIV to meet with all of these close collaborators in a formal way. I mentioned too that it's customary for the Pope each year to meet with the various people who work in the Holy See, especially notably at Christmas time, where he has separate audiences for the leadership of the Roman Curia, and on the same day for employees of the Vatican and the Holy See. And those audiences are always a high point of the year for Vatican employees. A reminder that there are a couple of events for the Holy Father in the next couple of days. Tomorrow, that is Sunday, May 25th, the Holy Father will be giving his Regina Coeli, of course, as usual, leading the faithful in the recitation of the Marian antiphon for Eastertide, the Regina Coeli, at noon tomorrow in St. Peter's Square. And then tomorrow afternoon, the Holy Father will be traveling to his cathedral, the Cathedral Archbasilica of St. John Lateran, where he will formally be installed as the Bishop of Rome. Of course, he's Bishop of Rome from the moment he accepts his election, but there are a number of formal ceremonies that take place at the beginning of each pontificate, including going to his cathedral church, again, St. John Lateran. And then tomorrow evening he's also paying a visit to the Papal Basilica of St. Mary Major, and that will complete a series of formal visits to the major churches of Rome, the Papal Basilicas. The first in precedence is the Papal Archbasilica of St. John Lateran. The Mother Church of the city and of the world, as is proudly proclaimed on its facade, but also the Church of St. Mary Major, and the basilicas of St. Peter and of St. Paul's outside the walls, which he visited earlier this week. For those of you watching on television, you can see that the Holy Father, after the formal greetings with the bishops and cardinals and leadership of the various dicasteries of the Vicariate of Rome, of the Holy See, the Holy Father has gone down to the main section of the Paul VI Hall, where he is greeting employees and family members and spending quite a bit of time shaking hands, speaking with people, and making and blessing rosaries and other religious items. And as the Holy Father greets the participants in this morning's audience for curial officials and Vatican employees, our live broadcast is going to draw to a close. On behalf of Vatican Radio, I would like to thank our partners who help make these live broadcasts available throughout the world, especially EWTN TV, Catholic Faith Network in America, Shalom World Television Networks USA, Catholic TV, and Luminous Radio in India. For full coverage of this morning's audience, along with other Vatican and world news, we do invite you to visit our Vatican News website at www.vaticannews.va, as well as our Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube accounts. And you'll also be able on those various social media platforms to join us again tomorrow for the Regina Coeli and for the visits to St. John Lateran and to St. Mary Major beginning tomorrow afternoon at 5 p.m. Rome time. Many thanks this morning to our producers and technicians here in the studio, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. My name is Christopher Wells. It's been a great pleasure and an honor to provide the English language translation of our Holy Father's remarks this morning. And we conclude with the Easter greeting. Christ is risen, Alleluia. Christus rexit, Alleluia.
English Channel. Vatican Media 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 English Channel. English Channel. Vatican Media English Channel.